Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Film Focus, episode 171, my first impressions on the Legend of Zelda live-action film announcement. Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, North, South, East, and West, and welcome to another episode of Film Focus. I'm your host, the Hypersonic 55, and I'm glad that you decided to join me once again for some film-related discussion. And the topic of conversation today, it just had to be talked about. Now, I understand, for those of you who do follow the podcast, I have been gone for a fair amount of time, and I didn't mean to be. I had planned to do a bunch of different reviews for a few different films here, there, and everywhere, but time wasn't on my side. And I never like to work when I feel frustrated or overwhelmed. And I never want this podcast to become work, so I left it for a little while. But whenever there's an announcement of a video game adaptation, you best believe I'm going to rise from the surface of the planet to come back here and share my thoughts. And this one is probably one of the most important video game adaptations that there ever was and ever will be. We're back at Nintendo, but we're talking about a Zelda film. Yes, there has been talk, rumors, and test footage of a Zelda film out there in the open for years. And with Nintendo finally breaking into the world of video game adaptations, primarily with Detective Pikachu in 2018, I want to say that was, and then having the Mario film come out earlier on this year, it was inevitable that Zelda was going to get the film treatment at some point. However, I think after the Mario film came out and it was such a big success, I think a lot of people were assuming that Nintendo were going to take their primary franchises, the big money makers, and make them animated. Which in turn, for a lot of fans, meant that they could potentially start building the seeds to an eventual Super Smash Bros. Film, which would be pretty kick-ass if they could pull it off. But I feel like that's, way too advanced for anybody to be thinking about that. We just need to get these franchises out in solid format first, and then we can look towards the potential future of chaos with all those Smash Brothers, shenanigans that could come. But anyway, I think for a little while, there were still some people thinking that Zelda could happen in live action. But again, with the success of the Super Mario Bros. Film, I was just thinking, okay, they may, hire Illumination to make an animated Zelda film, or you could use another studio to make that happen. But nope, it was just announced as of yesterday, which was November 7th, that there was going to be a live-action Zelda film. But here's the thing. The film is being developed at Sony Pictures, with Avi Arad as the producer. Yeah, that guy. And then on top of that, you have Wes Ball as the director, and the writer being Derek Connolly. Now, on paper, you have two ways to look at this. On the one hand, technically speaking, these people, along with Sony as a studio together, under Nintendo supervision, could work out, especially because unlike some of these other projects that they've worked on, Nintendo are fairly hands-on with their projects and they want to have the best representation of their projects possible. However, at the same time, Sony Pictures, for as many successes that they've had, at the same time, they have had a lot of misses, especially in recent years. And Avi Arad, for as many successes as he has had, he's also had a bunch of misses. And when it comes to Wes Ball and Derek Connolly, they've both worked on projects that are either liked or disliked amongst film fans. But we'll get into that a little bit. Let's firstly start with Sony Pictures. Sony Pictures, I think a lot of people mostly associate them with the Spider-Man films. And how they've treated the Spider-Man properties in recent time has definitely been a cause for concern. If you're not looking at their co-productions with Marvel, you look at stuff like Venom 1, 2, and Morbius as well, and you're just like, what are you doing over there? Now, granted, they have pretty much total control over how those projects choose to proceed. Whereas if they're working with Nintendo, I don't think Sony Pictures can really bully Nintendo into making things work their way. I'm assuming it will be more of a collaborative project, but I feel also that Nintendo will probably steer them in the right direction. So we could probably have something closer to what happened with the Marvel co-producing roles with how those films turned out, essentially. So I guess the Sony Pictures element isn't so much of a red flag. But when it comes to Avi Arad, any comic book fan who knows that man knows that he's a little infamous for being a little pesky. When it comes to the projects that he works on, he has produced a lot of really good stuff. But at the same time, I do remember reading and hearing stories about him being a little questionable to work with him insisting on certain ideas and putting his head into certain projects that need not have his contribution to it, essentially. But, going over the list of projects that he's worked on over the years, some of the really good ones that I've liked, obviously, would be, his work on Spider-Man 1 and 2. He did, some pretty good stuff with the Spider-Verse films recently. And, he was also a producer on the first Iron Man film as well, which was pretty interesting. And even though I know a lot of people didn't care for it, I did like the Uncharted film from last year. But for all the decent projects he's worked on, he also worked on Elektra, X-Men 3, the Ghost Rider movies as well. He also worked on Ghost in the Shell, and oh god, it's just like some of these projects you're just like, what are you doing, man? So we're still looking at this with Nintendo in mind, and again, they have been very, very protective of their franchises for years, so I don't feel like they're going to let other people boss them around when it comes to presenting their projects in the best way possible for, a new audience who haven't played the games. So there is that. And then on top of that, you have Wes Ball as the director, which I think is an interesting choice. He's mostly known for his work on the Maze Runner trilogy, and I know, depending on who you talk to within the film fandom, those films are either okay or they're crap. I think at least the first film was pretty good. It had an interesting concept, and I feel like Wes Ball did a good job of establishing this world, its characters, and creating something that was entertaining and unique for what it was. Obviously, it was based on the book series, but I feel like it was a great introductory chapter for that. And obviously with the subsequent films afterwards, I feel like each film sort of has diminishing returns. So while it was interesting to go outside of the maze and then discover the world outside of, where that first film took place, everything just never was as captivating as that first film. And I feel like it might just be a case of the source material not being that captivating to begin with, rather than it being mostly down to his direction. But I guess as a topic of conversation for another time. But the point is, Wes Ball, I think, is a capable director, and the first trailer that got released for the new Planet of the Apes film, entitled Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, definitely looks like it is riding in the right direction and borrowing the right elements from the previous films to establish this new world that they're going to create, essentially. So I guess after Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes comes out, we'll have a very good idea as to whether this man is the right person to shepherd this project or not. And then you have the writer, Derek Connolly. Now, he is an interesting character because he's worked on some pretty decent projects, but also some other ones that make you question, his abilities. Let's just put it that way. Now, on the one hand, he's worked on films like Safety Not Guaranteed, which I've heard is a great film by all accounts. I just haven't got around to watching it yet. It's been on my watch list for years. Kong Skull Island, which, I didn't really love, but, the general audiences seem to like it. So, that's at least another good film in this department. You also have Detective Pikachu, which I quite liked. It wasn't like, it was a crazy great script, but I feel like the plot for that film was pretty decent, all things considered. But then on top of that, you have his work on the Jurassic World films, and I don't really like a lot of the story or dialogue in any of those films. I think Jurassic World #1 is probably the most tolerable out of the three, Fallen Kingdom is genuinely one of the most painful films I've ever seen, and I really dislike it. And funnily enough, Dominion, when you're not focusing on the stupid flying locust and all these other weird shenanigans, I quite like their use of the original characters. But yeah, that film I recognize as a big old mess. So yeah. And obviously he also worked on The Rise of Skywalker, but by all accounts, he worked on the plot for that film before it got reformatted into The Rise of Skywalker as we know it, when J.J. Abrams came back in with Chris Terrio to create the new screenplay that ended up being the final product, essentially. But yeah, I guess just in general, there are a lot of interesting characters in play in these initial phases of this announcement. I guess it'll just be a case of what happens when it all gets executed, when we go into production. On the one hand, okay, so as you can tell, this is very unscripted. I literally just wanted to get my thoughts out there, and even if I was to get my thoughts together, I think I'd still be umming and ahhing, because this is just such a bizarre announcement. On the one hand, I'm thinking, okay, I am very much interested in the world of Zelda and where they could, draw from, because obviously the Zelda franchise has been going on since the late 80s, and there's various different incarnations of the world of Hyrule, its characters, and whatever plot they decide to do. So obviously you will have a story that will focus on the main three with Link, Zelda, and Ganon, but how are they going to do it? Are we going to go for an Ocarina of Time kind of vibe where we have Ganondorf before he turns into his more monstrous pigman form of Ganon? Or will we go with something closer to Breath of the Wild? Or will we go with something closer to Twilight Princess, which was funny because that game was clearly influenced by Lord of the Rings, which I think Lord of the Rings, once that series came out, I think a lot of people look towards that franchise as a pretty good, idea of what could be possible if you had the right scale and budget to depict, Zelda in live action. Now, obviously, there's only a handful of Zelda games where you've ever had full-scale wars of crazy attack sequences like that. And I think you'd probably want to do that more with a Breath of the Wild / Tears of the Kingdom kind of thing. But yeah, Zelda, there's just so many different directions you could go with it. I feel like you'd want to go simple yet big. So you'd probably want to go with, maybe the story from the first Zelda game, or I don't know, where would you go from there? Maybe A Link to the Past. But yeah, you don't want to be messing around with time travel shenanigans, light and dark worlds. I think again, you probably want to try and make it as straightforward as possible. But that's not to say that they couldn't just borrow various different elements from different games and then just coalesce it into one thing. There's too much to think about. I'll have to come back to you, maybe do a hopes and fears episode of the podcast and talk about is it what I hope could be in this film and what I'm afraid would be in this film. I think right now all I'm really concerned about is casting, because the Zelda franchise up until 2017 didn't have any proper voice acting if you discount the CDI games, which most people do, unless you're enjoying it for the meme material. But yeah, who are they going to cast as Link? Who's going to be Zelda? Who's going to be Ganon? How many other characters are they going to include in here? Because, again, depending on the era, we'd have characters like Impa, you might see Tingle. Will we get to see Epona in live action? There's so many other random people that you can consider. Will we get to see Beetle in live action? That would be hype. But I don't know if we could hear someone just go, oh, so crazy, man. There's so many quirky and unique elements about Zelda that work in the games that obviously wouldn't translate as well into live action. And obviously with live action, that means Link is going to have to talk, unless they decide to do some weird Bumblebee thing where they find a way to mute the dude and then make him so he can't speak. But since Link mostly still screams and shouts anyway, he's going to have to talk because he's not like a mute. He just doesn't speak. But there are certain games where he has conversation with people and he explains things. It's just that they never give him a voice to explain certain things that he's talking about. So I don't know, man. I'm not even going to speculate about casting because I don't really care. I'm normally just waiting to see who gets announced and then we get to see what chaos ensues afterwards. Now, if the announcement of the Mario cast was enough to send the internet into a frenzy, just imagine how much worse it will be with the live action cast. I am very, very, very curious to see how this plays out and what the costume design will be like in live action. Again, you just have to wonder why they decided to do it this way. I can understand that Zelda, being such a fantastical adventure based game full of action and all sorts of weird creatures and a unique world that could, really translate to live action if you had the right kind of creative vision. At the same time, I'm kind of just thinking, in the world of animation, you can create that same sort of thing and not have to worry about shooting on location, trying to get these otherworldly locations to look right in live action and then have them either visually enhanced by CGI or just having to, fancy them up with set design and all that sort of stuff. I'm wondering if the costumes are going to look right, if they'll look cool. Again, you just have to wonder, why didn't you just go with animation, where the limitations of what you can do in terms of stunt work, attacks, special effects and magic and all that other sort of chaotic craziness, you can just do it. But again, I feel like Nintendo, they like to be ambitious with their projects, especially when it comes to Zelda. Look at how the games have diversified and changed over the years, with how many different gimmicks and approaches to level design that they've messed around with over the years. So maybe this is just them just saying, you know what, we're going to swing for the fences with this. And I'm assuming there are a number of places in the world that they could film, that they could use to bring Hyrule to life in a pretty good way. I just don't know. I don't know. We're still very early on in this right now, so I think all we can really do is speculate until we get the announcement of the cast, and then find out who's doing the music, because the music in the world of Zelda is very, very important. And there are certain themes that will, obviously continue to pass through most of the games, like obviously the main theme song, or Zelda's theme, or Ganon's theme. But then it'll be interesting, depending on what location they decide to bring to live action, would we ever hear, the sounds of Castletown, or, is it Dragon Roost Island or Windfall Island? I doubt they'd go with the Wind Waker choice. But, obviously there's so many different songs that they could use. Song of Storms, if you ever heard that in live action, that would be pretty sick. Or Gerudo Town. There's just a lot of really banging songs from the Zelda franchise that you could utilize. Even some of the stuff from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have some pretty good sounds as well. And then it makes me wonder, who would they get to do the composition for that? Part of me just thinks, because of the Lord of the Rings vibes that Zelda sometimes gives off, would they just hire Howard Shore? Howard Shore would be pretty cool. But there's a number of different composers they could probably get for this. Anyway, I could talk about this for so long, but as you can tell, this is very off the cuff. I just wanted to get online and just share my thoughts as best as I could without going into a tizzy about the whole thing. But yeah, I am absolutely curious to see how this film plays out. And you best believe I will be making more episodes on this film as it gets, as more announcements come out. Anyway, now I just want to hear from you guys, ladies and gentlemen. What do you think about the announcement of the Legend of Zelda film? Are you excited? Are you concerned? What do you think about the choice of having Sony being the ones to develop this film as opposed to any other studio? What do you think about Avi Arad's appearance? Do you think he will be a good collaborator for Miyamoto and Nintendo? Or do you feel concerned because of the comic book projects he's worked on over the years? And what do you think about Wes Ball and Derek Connolly? Do you think that they are a good director-writer combo, or are you concerned? Again, share your thoughts, man. I know there's a lot of people that are pretty hyped about this, because there have been people talking about wanting a live-action Zelda for many, many years, and it seems like it's finally happening. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we probably won't see this project for at least another 3 years, maybe. But we'll see. Anyway, thank you for listening to my rambles, ladies and gentlemen. And be sure to check me out on Twitter, where I'm at Hypersonic55 or at FilmFocus55, or X if you want to call it that weird thing. I'm not going to call it that. Check out the podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify, and other places where podcast can be found. Film Focus is on YouTube as well. There's only a couple videos on there, but I'm hoping to upload on there a little bit more frequently in the future. And yeah, I guess that'll be it for now. Thank you for listening as always, and until the next time, this is the Hypersonic 55 signing out. Peace.